Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door Netadmin. Or maybe I should say good evening. I realize it's a lot later than it would be. In fact, I had a message from somebody like 2 minutes after the normal deadline going, "Is everything all right? You know, it's already 2 minutes past the deadline and I don't see a video." Yeah, I understand. Mea culpa, I'm very sorry for not having the video out on time, but here it is anyway, and still on Monday if I hurry up and get this done. So what are we talking about today? Today I'm going to talk about file migration, specifically how I move a bunch of files from one place to another. It's about as basic as it gets, but there's various ways that you can do it. The easy way, the basic way, is to just copy and paste or drag and drop, move the folders and the files that you want. But I'm going to show you how an admin does this. So follow along, because the tool that we are looking at today is the good old trusty Robocopy. Now, you might wonder, what exactly is Robocopy? How do I use it? I know some people are very big on finding some sort of free GUI that just functions as a front end to the tool. But trust me on this when I say you don't need it. You really don't. Robocopy is a tool that's been built into versions of Windows since, I want to say since at least Windows 7, possibly earlier. And what it is a folder copying tool, specifically folders. It's not big on saying exactly which files within those folders. It just copies whole folders and the files within them. And there's a lot of options. If we do this Robocopy /?, the screen fills up really quickly, but it's also a really good way of immediately finding all the options that are available in your copy of Robocopy, because it's different per version of Windows. So I'll usually end up doing this just to be really clear on what the options are in the version that I'm using. And then you can see right here, this is robust file copy for Windows. That's where the Robo comes from. It's not that it's some sort of mechanical servant or anything like that. It's just robust. But usage, Robocopy, source, destination. You can give it a filter for files, but honestly, I would say it's most reliable if you just do source, destination and then give it the options. Now, keep in mind that when you specify this, you're not going to be copying. Let's do this properly here. And we'll do this a couple different ways just to make some examples on the fly. Now, if your folder path that you're copying doesn't have any spaces, then you can just put it there as it is. If it does have a space in it, then you need to wrap it in quotation marks. That's the first one. Second one, take a look here at what I've done. I'm a server share folder to server new share folder, because this is acting on a folder. It will copy the folder that you have to the folder path that you specify. It will not put it in that folder. If I did this and copied it to the new share, or even if I did this and copied it to the new share, the contents of folder would end up in new share. And that's not going to be what you're looking to do most of the time. There's always exceptions. But for the most part, you're going to want to do something like this, where you're specifying the folder that you are getting in the share, and then specifying the same folder in a new location. Alternately, if you really wanted to, you can also just go share to share, and that's fine, and that's perfectly acceptable. But source, destination. Okay, cool. Scrolling back up to the top here, I also happen to know that I will usually go with /e. Copy subdirectories, but not empty ones. If you do /s, it'll do a recursive copy, but anything that's empty won't be copied at all. It just won't be there. Usually, even if I have empty folders, I still want them copied over, so I will do /e. You don't need to do /s and /e, just /e is enough. Then you have copy files in restartable mode. That is an option. Or you can have copy files in backup mode. You can use restartable mode, and if access denied, use backup mode, as you wish. Personally, I always use /b. I don't want it to be restartable. If it fails, I want it to fail completely, and I'll restart the copy if I have to. Maybe that would be different if I was copying a file, a single file that was like 1 terabyte in size. I could see not wanting to have to restart that. But I have never seen a file that is 1 terabyte in size. So for the most part, I'm just using backup mode. Backup mode causes Robocopy to assert backup operator rights, which gives it the ability to access some files that it normally would not have the ability to access. Is it something that's absolutely necessary? It's probably not absolutely necessary, but I use it anyway. So just out of habit, I would do /e/b, just like that. More options. There's a lot of them, and I don't use all of them all the time. You can use this to use, unbuffered I/O for large files. Typically speaking, I won't use that. It's rare that I am moving a file where it's only large files. So typically I'll just drop that option entirely. And I'm not usually copying EFS files either, because, yeah. Copy. Default is copy data, attributes, and timestamps. By default, for files. We'll get to the folder options in a minute. You can add X to skip alternate data streams. I never have a need for that. Security, yes, typically I will want to copy security, owner info, auditing info. So the default is copy :DAT, and you can add as many of these as you want. Look at the next one, /sec. Copy files with security, this is equivalent to copy DATS. So if you want to copy data, attributes, timestamps, and security, you can just do /sec. Or copy all file info is copy .so. Data, attributes, timestamps, security, owner info, and auditing info, and it'll copy the alternate data streams because X is to skip that. Cool. If I'm going from a Windows server to a Windows server within the same domain, I will usually use copy all because I want to copy all the information that's available. If I am going from a Windows server to a Samba server, or from a Samba server to a Windows server, I will probably use /sec because I do want data, attributes, timestamps, and security, but Samba doesn't have the same kind of owner info and auditing info as a Windows server does. And so when I'm copying owner information or auditing information, I usually end up with a lot of errors that I then have to troubleshoot manually. So for the most part, if I'm going between Windows and Samba or Samba to Windows, then I'm going to say skip the owner information. If I need to go back and, deal with that later, I will. And I'm just going to call the auditing information something that's not going to get moved over. Just the way it is. Cool. So let's say I'm doing this between Windows servers. I will add copy all here. Cool. What's the next thing that I want to add? Well, there's a lot of things. You can do copy no file info. You can do secfix, which fixes security if you copied it just without this flag. If you don't use /copy, it'll use the default copy data attributes timestamps, and you wouldn't have security. You can use, where is it, secfix, to fix the file security on all of the files. Same as you can use timfix to fix times on all files. This is a relatively newer option, so I'm not as familiar with it. Purge, this is a dangerous one. A very dangerous one. Delete destination files and directories that no longer exist in the source. Think about that for a minute. Here's another dangerous one. Mirror. Mirror a directory tree, equivalent to E, copy subdirectories, including empty ones, plus purge. Fun fact, this is one of my failures in the past. I actually listened to some of Microsoft's documentation, but Microsoft's documentation was incomplete. This is also how I know that you have to specify the folder name on both your source and your destination. Because following Microsoft's documentation at the time actually had me with Mirror. I ended up deleting most of a server's Windows directory. That really broke a lot of things. That really broke a lot of things. Don't get me started on how the server let me actually do that in the first place. I had it in booted in a special mode, so normally you wouldn't be able to do that, but I did, and I broke the server really badly. There wasn't even a backup for it, so it just had to get wiped out and rebuilt from scratch. Ugh. So be careful with things that delete files if they don't exist in your source. Be really careful with that. Move files, delete from source after copying. This could be really handy. Or move files and directories. One little catch with that. If we scroll down here, there's a multi-threaded copy. If you use a multi-threaded copy, it will not delete the folders. It'll delete the files, but it won't delete the folders, and you'll get a whole bunch of leftover empty folders behind. So it doesn't quite work the way that you would expect. I usually just do a straight copy without trying to move things, because if something breaks during the copying process, I want to be able to go back. I want to be able to roll back to the old version of the files. That just seems like a safe thing to do. So I usually won't use those options for both of those reasons. Add or remove attributes, not going to do that. Create a directory tree and zero-length files, doesn't seem useful for most cases, so I'm not going to do that. Create files using 8.3 FAT file names only, also not terribly useful to me. Turn off very long path support. No, I usually want that. So monitor source, run again when more than changes or more than minutes pass. You can do that. I've never had a need to do that. Run hours. I've never had a need to do that or check run hours on a per file basis. Again, not something I've ever needed to do. Same with interpacket gap. There's a lot of options here that are useful in specialist situations, but not for most operations. Copy junctions as junctions, copy symbolic links, multi-thread, here we are. Default 8 If you specify /MT, it'll use 8 threads, which means it'll be copying 8 files at a time. Must be at least one, not greater than 128. Not compatible with interpacket gap or EFS raw. And the last thing, redirect output using /log option for better performance. Multi-threaded is a two-edged sword. With Samba, or SMB specifically, I'm talking about the protocol, not the server in this case. So with SMB, the time required to pull a file, open a file, close a file, all of that is essentially constant. If you think about it in terms of seconds, it'll take 2 seconds to open a file. It won't actually take 2 seconds. I'm just picking a random number out here. It'll take 2 seconds to open a file, 2 seconds to send it, 2 seconds to close a file. If you have a big file, it might take 2 seconds to open it, 8 seconds to send it, and another 2 seconds to close it. Well, that 2 seconds to open it and to close it means that there's a lot of stop-start if you're only doing one file at a time. And so you're not maximizing the use of your bandwidth. Whereas if you're doing 8 files at a time, some of those files will be opening or closing while others are sending, and you'll get better overall use of your bandwidth. So it can speed things up a lot if you are using this for mostly folders that have a lot of small files in them. Is it useful if you have files that are 100 gigs, 200 gigs? No. Because again, you're only talking about 2 seconds to open it, 2 seconds to close it. And then you're talking, oh, now I'm going to wait for half an hour while the file actually transfers. If that's the case, using this option is going to slow you down because you'll be trying to move or copy 8 of these files at the same time, and you're not going to get the benefit of being able to transfer while the opening and closing is happening because the transfer times are so much larger in proportion to the opening and closing. So multi-thread is a very useful option, but you want to be careful about where you use it. That said, most of the time I will use it, and a lot of the time I will bump it up above the default of 8, and I'll actually choose something like 16. If you've got a lot of small files, you can basically set this to the same number of CPU cores that you want to be using. And on a server, that could be many, but I don't go like 48, 64 cores. I don't do that. I'll usually stick to 8, 16, maybe 32 if I'm feeling really, really confident. But usually 16. That's good enough for me. There we are. So decopy. What to copy for folders. Remember how we had these same options for files? These are the options for folders. Data, attributes, timestamps, same as before. Extended attributes, that's EAs, and you can also skip alternate data streams there as well. The default here is only to copy data and attributes, but not timestamps. I don't know why that's the default for directories, but typically speaking, I want the timestamps so that people can still see the last modified time on that. So I'll choose, got to put a space in there first, decopy that, just like that. Back up we go. No decopy. If you want to copy nothing, no offload. I do want the offload mechanism, that helps. Compress. Also a new option, probably doesn't gain you a whole lot. I don't know. I haven't experimented with this yet. Somebody experiment and let us know in the comments. I don't know. File throttling options. Max, I don't use these throttling options because most of the time I'm doing it after hours anyway, so it's not like anybody else is using the network. I'm just bulk moving files from one server to another. File selection options. This lets you get a little more fine-grained. Only files, only this, only that. You can also exclude files or exclude directories. I don't use this option terribly often, but something that can be useful if you're copying full drives is to exclude something like system volume information, so that you're not copying a bunch of system restore files from one server to another that aren't really going to be useful. But it's very rare that I am copying the entire root of a drive. Usually I'm copying a folder within that drive, and so system volume information isn't something that I actually have to exclude too often these days. But you can use it for that. Exclude change files, newer files, older files, yada, yada, yada. There's other documentation online if you want to figure out what all of these are. Like, what is a lonely file? What is a tweaked file? I don't remember what a lonely file is. I can tell you, I think, what a tweaked file is. It's something that has the same content, but it's only attributes that have changed of some sort. It's just been tweaked a little bit, okay? Max file size, minimum file size, so many of these. DST, compensate for a 1 hour DST time difference. I use DST if I'm in summertime. I do not use it when I'm in standard time. I don't know if that's the right way to use it, if I'm perfectly honest. That just is how I use it. Exclude symbolic links. Exclude symbolic links for directories and junction points. Most of the time, you should not need to use this. If you get into a place where you're trying to do a robocopy on, say, the C drive directly, there are some symbolic links that can actually lead you into an eternal loop. And in that case, XJD, to exclude symbolic links for directories, can help you with that. But that is an edge case, and I honestly haven't had to touch that since, what, 2011, 2012? Hopefully it's not something that we have to fiddle with anymore. Include modified files with differing change times. I don't know. I've never had to use this because I don't use Robocopy on a directory that already exists. Typically speaking, I'm using Robocopy to copy an entire folder in one shot. And if it doesn't succeed, I delete the failed copy and I do it again later. So I've never had to use this. Again, play with it if you want. Number of retries, default 1 million. That's a long time. How long do you want to wait between refries? Refries? What am I eating, a burrito? Retries. Default is 30 seconds. So you want to do a million retries, waiting 30 seconds in between each failure. So you're telling me that you're going to wait for 500,000 seconds trying to do this, plus the time it takes for the failures to happen. Not 500,000 seconds, 500,000 minutes. You're nuts. I will usually set this to something sane like R10, W3. I'm waiting 3 seconds to retry it, and I'm only going to try it 10 times, and I'm moving on. Sorry, that's all I'm giving you. And I will often also add /reg because you can save this to the registry as default settings. So the first time I use Robocopy, I'm going to specify R10W3reg. But then every time I use it on that server after that, it's got my new default settings set and I'm good. Okay, cool. TBD, low free space mode. These are relatively new and I don't touch them. So moving on, logging options. I do typically report all extra files and I do produce verbose output showing skipped files. So that's /x/v. I will also usually do NP, no progress, don't display percentage copied. If you're viewing it on the console in the command prompt, then having a percentage counter count up is very useful. But the reason that I do no progress is because the last options, log, output status to log file. Very important if you're using multi-threaded. When you're using, and I would say important in all cases, honestly, but especially with multi-threaded, multi-threaded goes fast, which means that Robocopy actually spends more time trying to print text to the screen than it does transferring files. It's a lot faster if you don't have it output to the screen at all. It's faster if you just let it dump all of the information to a text file. And if it does that, it actually prints every percentage as a separate value. And so I don't need a progress if it's going into a text file. I don't need to see every percentage for every single file. That's ridiculous. So no progress, and just dump it into a log file. And you can put this log file anywhere you want. If you're going to use a path that has spaces in it, you can put it in, or in this case, you can always put it in quote marks, even though this path does not have spaces in it. And you can just dump it into any sort of file. I usually use .log just to make it clear that this is a log file. It still opens in Notepad. You can just as easily put it in a text file. That's fine. It's just going to be plain text output. So even if you do something like .doc, it's not going to make it Word format all of a sudden. It's still going to be plain text. So .txt or .log should be fine for most for most cases. You can output it as Unicode. This might be useful if you're using some extended font characters. If you have files that are written in Chinese script or Korean or Arabic or any of the other fonts that are available within Unicode, you can do that. This will output to the screen as well as the log file, but again, it'll incur the same penalty of being slower as if you had just done it to the screen in the first place. So I don't use that. And you can take parameters, you can save parameters if you want. You can just quit without copying anything, and then you can just see how it responds. And yeah. Then there's some remarks. You can read those if you really want. But this is basically what we're left with. Robocopy, source, destination. Copy all your subdirectories, including empty ones. Use backup operator privileges to do it. Copy all the data, in this case, for a Windows to Windows transfer. Data, attributes, timestamps, security, owner, auditing information. Use a multi-threaded copy, 16 threads. For directories, copy data, attributes, and timestamps. Retry up to 10 times per file, waiting 3 seconds in between each. Save these in the registry as the default settings. Report all extra files that are encountered. Be verbose in your log. Do not add percentages or progress indicators to the log file. Save it to this log file, and I would hit enter, and it would begin the copy. And if you wanted to, you can actually go and double click this log file while it's running, and you can see roughly where it is. But here's the catch. If you're using multi-thread, if it gets stuck on one big file, you won't see the log file update until it's finished that one big file. It might go through a whole bunch of other small ones, but you won't see that in the log file until it finishes the one big file, and then it will print all the small ones that it's already done all at once. So you can kind of get a feel for where it is in by looking at the log file while it's copying, but otherwise you're basically going blind and just waiting for it to copy. So I hope you estimated pretty well how long it was going to take you before you actually started using it. But there you go. There is the basics of using Robocopy. And I'm pretty sure that that's it for now. So hopefully that's something that you find useful. If you have any questions or comments, or if you've tried some of the settings that I've kind of skimmed over because I haven't had a use for them, let us know down in the comments, whether it's questions or anything you want to share. Within reason. Within reason. Yeah. That's basically it for now. So thank you very much for watching. I am your next door net admin, and we will see you next time.